Welcome to podcast here, Toten. My name's Rad.
I'm Matt.
Yo,
Yo! It's Tack, and it is a Saturday with the boys.
I'm back. I'm not supposed to be here, but I'm here after all. It's Nabbers Hunter.
Get him out of here.
Legally obligated to.
I feel like Rad kind of looped me in here by chance because he and I were talking about me getting him the software that I use for my video stuff, and he's like, "We're having a podcast tonight. Want to be there?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then a second later, I was like, "What did I just do?"
Right?
You're back in. When you thought you were out, they pulled you back in.
Yep. I think we're just doing some basic chatting about the Zombies arc. Just kind of, we're starting to get into potential leak season for Black Ops 5, or for whatever it's called, and Blundell leaving. So I think it's just kind of a casual chat about the state of affairs.
Calling it Black Ops 5 there, Tack. Did you just violate your NDA?
Right. I know. I got blown out, and now I.
Or maybe it's not, and he's pretending to know what it is to add credibility.
That's the question, isn't it? At any rate,
But
go ahead, Tack.
Yeah. What? I guess I don't know. Start on Blundell. What do you think about? I guess just the fact of his departure first off, and then what you think it portends for the story if it continues.
Who should we start with here?
Like rock, paper,
you, because you
scissors.
talked first.
Yeah.
Me. Okay.
Not it.
Yep.
All right. I shall take the floor. What it means to have Blundell gone? Well, my first thought is that oh man, my brain starts going one direction. I tell you what, I have a thought in my head, and then my brain drags me a completely different direction. And says that could be cool to think about. I should probably stick with what I'm going with. The first impression that I have is that any influence that Blundell had is hopefully gone. We were talking earlier before the podcast about what the Well, I know for all you Blundell fans, no apologies. There is I feel like a very low center of gravity here at Treyarch in the zombie storyline, and that Craig Houston is that center of gravity. And so whether you had back in the day Jimmy Zelensky, trying to climb way up on that this whatever object it is that's swaying side to side, Jimmy Z would sway it ever so much to the crazy. And then when he dropped off, it seemed to have swung far over to the other side because Blundell was trying to sit on top. And you just have this wild swinging of the story from side to side, and Houston somehow keeps it balanced. So I don't know if there's going to be someone who's going to try to have a lot of influence on where it goes from here, or like I feel in Black Ops 4, we got the truest representation of what zombies should have been from throwing back to the time of Black Ops 1. When, as you said earlier, Tack, Zelensky didn't really have the official position that Blundell had, where he could, sit on top of the entire project and sway it as far to one side or the other as he seemed to have wanted to do.
Well,
and so you got a purer extract of zombies in something like Black Ops 1, where you got more Houston storytelling coming through, and then come to Black Ops 4, and we had a lot of people complaining that it was the same maps, but in a way it felt like a purification of that, and a more of a it's the original feel of Call of Duty Zombies coming back. So I feel like maybe that I feel like that stabilization is happening with Houston having it kind of bringing that center of balance a little bit lower and taking people off the top.
Yeah, that was one of my things about I just wasn't sure whether Zelensky wasn't able to if Zelensky had taken over at the time Blundell did, if he would have taken it as crazy, or whether he was just constrained by somehow it being early days. But then again, we know that, in your earliest days, when they were just making a kind of fantasy mode that caught on, you could be wild and crazy. So it's maybe not fair to say they had restrictions on them then, but yeah. Matt and Rad, what do What are your thoughts on all this?
I think for me, it's like it's really hard because I would kind of want to know like what was sort of the creative process was like behind the scenes, because it seems like Craig Houston was the sort of constant that's been there since World at War. And I wonder like how much of an input, everyone sort of had. Like how much was Houston's, how much was Blundell's, how much was Jimmy's. And it's weird because they're all sort of, I don't know, for me it's kind of hard to tailor out like what was distinctly, Jimmy's or Blundell's, because like the Apothicons and the Keepers, like I think back to like Shangri-La, like the Crystal Skulls and stuff like that, and then they were sort of teasing the idea of like, otherworldly entities, and yeah, we had the Vrilya. So it's like how much of it was really fleshed out and how much of it was one person's and how much of it was sort of carried over. Like, I don't know. The only thing I have to say is that is if since that Craig Houston's still probably there, um, that legacy will still kind of continue. It's just, I guess my thing is just who sort of had the final sway is where I always go. But yeah, Rad, did you have anything
Yeah.
to?
Yeah, I would say Zombies is in the Wild Wild West phase, where really it's uncertain what direction they can go in really any direction they want to. It's an open pasture. But I think as long as Craig is there, there's going to be that unified voice. Like for me, I couldn't really get into Infinite Warfare zombies or World War II zombies or I guess Exo zombies, just simply because they didn't have that Treyarch voice, which that Treyarch voice I'm now realizing is probably that Craig Houston voice. I know he used to write for like I think Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
I think he's got that wit and that great character writing that just it really does it for me. So I think as long as he's there, no matter what story they do, Chaos or reboot or something completely new, I think it whether or not it's successful, I think it will be something we would all enjoy as zombie fans.
Well, that's, I think, one of the big questions to me is that for certain people, it's a question of whether you just enjoy that Treyarch feel.
Mm-hmm.
Because, it's still up in the air whether Ether even returns in the first place. So does it matter that Craig Houston's the writer? Is the question we have here, are we going to have a good writer, or are we going to have a writer who writes a story that we like and that we have nostalgia about and that we vibe with? Because Houston might be a good writer, but there's nothing saying. I would argue that Jimmy wasn't necessarily a good writer. I feel like
he's
Jimmy did
animator, I think.
Yeah, and I feel like Houston was a lot of the story brains, and Jimmy had like ideas that he threw out there. He wasn't necessarily the writer of them. He just threw stuff at Houston, and Houston fleshed it out beautifully. I feel like Blundell had a lot more sway over what actually got
right. He was a director, so he had more corporate. Not corporate, but like leadership. Like he's got this is probably best for marketing. This is what people in general will like.
I think can I just go 1 second?
Yeah, no, by all means, go ahead.
Because this, I wanted to say this before I forgot. Because it's another thing that I kind of go back to is that the whole idea of who was sort of in charge of zombies. It's not just the story, it's like the gameplay too. So yeah, you have like Jimmy, who's maybe coming from more from an art perspective. You have Blundell, which I think was more of like a general gameplay perspective. So it's like their input might not even translate too much to story. Like Blundell could have just been more about like the direction and flow of the map. I think he definitely was involved in the story a lot, but like, you know what I mean? Like, right. I wonder how much
definitely
of it.
Agree. Yeah.
I feel like maybe Blundell was going for more epic reaches, and Jimmy was actually pretty satisfied with the simplicity, arcadey feel of it. So maybe that's that pendulum that I was talking about earlier, of which Houston forms the sort of center of balance, is two guys who have some influence over the story, but most is over the style.
Yeah, and like the style also translates into gameplay and aesthetic and stuff like that. So it's like, I kind of just go, Craig Houston is probably that rock.
I have a question for you all. Do you think, going off recent point, do you think that Blundell leaned into tropes more, or do you think Zelensky did? Like good versus evil. Like it was on.
Ooh, that's a good question.
I was going to I was going to say I think Blundell did. It felt like that, but then again, I don't know. What Black
But
Ops
you don't
1
always know
seems
what Zelensky was
tropish.
thinking. Yeah,
It depends on what kind of trope you're talking about, though. If you're
Yeah.
talking
I think
about,
it's just different tropes.
yeah, well, but it's
Like
but
the
it's
the
still very
overarching
characters,
different.
though.
good versus evil,
Mhm.
just like binary
Right.
type. I don't know.
But
I think
they even
it
got
by
the
the end it got
answer.
a little more like it was less binary. It was more gray. There is no bad
Really?
or good. It's everyone is a little bit of both. I think that's what I got from
Okay,
the end at least.
I don't think
I've
we ever.
gotta.
I don't think we
Sorry,
ever
go
got
ahead,
the
Rad.
answer.
I've got to disagree here
Okay.
because I like that dismissive. Okay, there.
Okay.
Because
hear it.
that's what always tore me in the early days. I mean, that's what pulled me into zombies. Really was like Shino Numa is what I mark as my starting point for story because the song was the one and it had that question of the souls of the zombies trapped inside are witnessing everything they're doing and they're suffering. They don't want to be doing the things that they're doing. And so that question actually, I had brought that up when I first watched oh dear, not World War Z. What's the Will Smith one? Was it Will Smith? Yeah, Will
I Am
Smith.
Legend.
I Am Legend. It was when I watched
Yeah.
I Am Legend for the first time. It was the first zombie movie I ever watched. Forgive me. But I was like, so what happens to the souls of a person who's undead? And nobody had any really good answers because no one who I'd asked was equipped to answer that kind of question or really was of the kind of mind who thinks about that kind of question, to their discredit. And I know that was snobby, but excuse me, I'm a codger. Anyway, so when when
Intellectual. I hope I play Call of Duty Zombies.
well, when Kevin Sherwood appears on the scene with that question, the one, I was like, man, this is deep. This is what like zombies thinks about, and so like Call of Duty Zombies thinks about, and so that brought me into that depth. So I felt like it was that gray area where usually it's almost like zombies are the evil. I mean, it isn't what's the game? Isn't there like a game about like evil's actually in the title that's about zombies?
Evil Within.
I think so. Is that
No.
Evil Within or
I
Evil
don't know.
Dead? I mean, Evil Dead. There's Evil Dead too.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole idea of zombies being an evil, or like the voodoo of zombies, any kind of thing that gives them the idea that it's evil. But then, just like right out the gate, 3 maps in, and you have this question of: are they evil or are they just trapped?
Which I think kind of leads to the next question, because I feel like we never got our answer. That's what I'd sort of argue, because there was always sort of like, there's the tortured soul, but then there's the even greater evil behind them. And then at first it was like, oh, who is it? It's Samantha. But then there's something even greater behind. And then we just eventually worked your way up to like Monty and the Shadow Man. But there never really was any reconciliation to like who they are, what they are, or all sort of the sort of the cosmology behind it. So I don't know. We didn't really get an answer to like what happened. And
I don't
that's
know if
kind of
there's anything more vanilla than a neutral duality. What the? I mean, seriously, like we were like, I'm okay, because it makes sense. Like, okay, if you're gonna do tropes, you have a good and you have an evil,
Yeah.
and it sure felt like we were going that way for a while. I mean, that's why I
Right.
argue that the early games were the grayest because it was dark and there was definitely something wrong, but you sympathized with the zombies and you sympathized with Samantha because she was a traumatized child, and you sympathized with Maxis because he was he was just a struggling individual, and yeah, some people around here deeply disagree with that. I've heard it's a pretty volatile argument. You sympathize with Rick Toppin because oh yeah, I know. Y'all, I'm about to stop here, and y'all can take it away. Just tear me apart after this. But I mean, you sympathize with Rick Toppin because I mean, he really was a stable, very like cool guy prior to touching the MPD. And then you have all of them who just get corrupted, and so it's gray, gray, gray. It's like not really bad people, but they're doing bad things. And then you go into shadows of evil and that sort of thing, and it was like, aha, here we have a duality. We have the keepers and we have the overlords. We have the shadow man who's their representative. He's like the evil guy. And then we come to the end of it all, and it's like nobody's really evil. Everyone's just kind of neutral, but they're definitely not the same side. So you have like a neutral duality. Have we ever seen something like that before? I think the question about whether these two guys follow tropes is I think there's a lot more to talk about on that topic because that
I
is a
think it-
really good question. I'm done.
I think it's just because there might have just been a lot that's scrapped. Because it felt like we were going somewhere with it. That like there was always this idea that I think like the zombies and everyone was sort of pawns in this weird cosmic game, and it always felt like the true evil like lied, beyond the veil of reality or whatever it may be. And we never
Right.
really, I felt like we were building up to that like, oh, okay, there's something else, there's something behind the scenes, and I was still waiting for like the inevitable like Monty betraying us, and it being that like like because it always seemed like at the very least it was the lesser of two evils was the kind of theme that I felt like was at least sort of consistent in zombies. Like, yeah, this person is bad, but maybe they're more redeemable or more morally gray, but there's someone even worse behind that, and that seemed like to be the only thing that kind of held constant. And I was expecting that to be the sort of dynamic between Shadow Man and like Monty, that Monty was like sort of the epitome of evil, and the Shadow
Right.
Man was maybe like someone who was kind of like, I always like to think that maybe he was the first person to like sell his soul to Monty or something like that. But we never got that, and we got like, I guess
Right.
they're good, but I guess they're not bad,
But who
and we
was the
just
good? You can't have a duality if you
well,
only got evil.
well, that's what I mean is that like they tried to paint like Monty as the
Yeah,
good,
he's a great guy.
and we never like I was just expecting that it was more of like a sort of like I said like a hierarchy of like evil, and we never got that. Because like, all right, hear me out, because like I always figured with if like Monty is something like the devil, I always thought it was really interesting that maybe the apothecon or the keepers were the first people to sell their souls to Monty and then become corrupted. And it's like this weird rift that because like the Shadow Man bears Monty's mark, which is 666, and like I like to think that they were like the ones sort of doing his bidding, and maybe
Is
like
that
going
Monty's mark?
Yeah. Wait, what?
because okay, so the whole thing is that the Shadow Man, when he gives the mark of the beast in Shadows of Evil, it's just three sixes on top of each other,
Yeah.
and
Oh, I thought you said
that's
that. I thought you said that was Monty's mark.
oh sorry,
That's
well
the Shadow Man's mark.
yeah, it's okay, so it's the Shadow Man's mark, but yet the Shadow Man also calls Monty the devil, and that's clearly like say satanic imagery. And then when you have the whole idea that the Shadow Man and Monty were friends or allies, like the way that I always tried to like make it all make sense is that the Shadow Man might have been the first to like fall prey to Monty and his schemes and was sort of like his herald, and then the Apothecons broke away and decided that their sort of war with Monty was, instead of him going around and sort of reaping and corrupting souls, what they were going to do is wipe out all of existence so Monty had nothing to corrupt. That was sort of the way that's the way that I kind of envisioned it, because it's just weird that he calls him Satan, and yet you bear the mark and it's a mark 666 and they were friends. Like there's some weird association that they were connected, but that's how I viewed it. But then we never got who Monty or the Shadow Man really were. But that was sort of my 2 cents on it.
Oh,
Well,
I think
So
we
many
just got so
questions.
submerged that I like these last
I
these
still
last two rants. Heck, Rad, you need to bring us down some or
Mm-hmm.
something. Like we can't keep going up at this pitch. It doesn't
Oh,
end
all right.
well.
We're
from
doing
here.
it. We're gonna keep going further. Okay, so the question.
Folks, we're at 30,000 feet. We're going to go ahead and keep ascending to around 50,000 at that point. Your oxygen masks will fall. Please take care of yourself before attempting to help others. Thank you.
Oh man, no, I forgot it all. I loved your bit too much.
I just wanted the idea.
We were talking about the Apothecons, though.
Yeah.
And how they.
Oh, Monty being the devil, right?
Yeah,
And-
carry on.
yeah, okay. Okay, actually, I remember my question now. Was there ever a map that we know of in which Monty was some sort of controller? The subtext of my question being who's the controller when the eyes are red?
that's a topic in itself.
We
That
don't
really
know.
is.
Yeah, we don't know, and Blood of the Dead makes it more confusing, which is why it's like I feel like even though the Shadow Man might be behind Blood of the Dead, I almost feel like that's like Monty's mark, is like all that satanic kind of stuff, and it's just sort of like what's left over. Um, yeah, there's no clear, and it's just this weird like maybe they were trying to sort of appease both kind of views of like, oh, is the controller like the devil or is it something else? Because there's too much imagery associated with like hell, and like even when you start the map, Dempsey and all them
Yeah.
constantly talk about it being hell, and it's hell. The internally the map was called Helcatraz, and you have fire and brimstone, and then you have the pentagrams and all these. So it's like it's clearly like supposed to be like kind of satanic, but then you have this like Lovecraftian kind of. So it's like they never really tailored out how any of that works, and I just always assume that like it's sort of Monty's touch like by proxy, and I don't know. So we never got that answer either.
I think that dichotomy.
Love.
I actually would agree that the dichotomy between Shadow Man and Monty was handled pretty poorly. It's like they had an idea of where they wanted to get. They wanted to have something between them in Revelations, but like Monty was introduced so late, and then in Black Ops 4 he just doesn't appear because I mean they could get Malcolm McDowell. I mean, but there's just barely anything on it, and I don't know if they abandoned it out of disinterest or maybe they just thought just leave it as it is. I don't know. An idea I thought of was like, because I know the Shadow Man and like all the Apothicons were kind of based on like Lovecraft. And I know a big part of the Lovecraft horror is that like you don't quite understand. The reason they're so horrifying is because you don't understand anything about them. They're so inhuman. So like maybe their relationship and what kind of evil they actually are, you just don't understand. Maybe that was the idea, and that's why it's so vague what they are and what they do in their free time.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, they're just squid monsters under all that, so who knows?
Yeah.
It's like, because Monty's a squid monster now, apparently.
Well, I mean, it came off feeling, the whole thing came off feeling more like a meme than than Alien.
So the one thing that I kind of always go back to is when you look at the Chronicles, and I know it's dependent on like the person who views the Chronorium or whatever. There's like select information, but I always found the in the beginning line interesting because it says in the beginning there was the Ether and the Keepers, and then it says something like what is it? Then it mentions the Shadow Man and Monty, and like keeping with that duality, it makes it sound like one is from the Ether and one is from the Keepers, because like it just the way that sentence is written, it feels like it should be clearer and should say like among the Keepers were the Shadow Man and Monty, but instead we have in the beginning there was the Ether and the Keepers, and then it says something about like then it just mentions Shadow Man and Monty, which makes me think you're already thinking in terms of like a duality, or in terms of two, like a set of two, like there's A and B. So then I'd imagine the next
respectively.
Yeah, so A and B respectively. So I would imagine the next sentence or the next part of the sentence still follows that A and B respectively. So like, but I don't know. That's where I've just
questionably written parts of the timeline here and there. So
so that's what I go with, and that's what I hold my crackpot theory is that Monty's like the Aether or the Dark Ether or something, but we don't know. I don't know.
That is a sexy title. Lord of the Dark Ether.
Yeah. Because like,
but I mean, go on.
I was gonna say because it just I feel like to me it makes the most sense because it has the theme of the lesser of two evils all together. It makes sense about if he was the source of their corruption, why there's sort of that like relationship, almost like that paternalistic, like, oh, Monty was my friend and father figure, and then the Shadow Man's gonna betray him, and you have those themes kind of seen throughout zombies, like Maxis and Richtofen, and one betrays the other because the one is technically more evil, and it explains why there's sort of like Lovecraftian but also satanic imagery kind of thrown all around together. It just makes sense if Monty was just sort of like some evil entity that went around corrupting worlds and stealing souls, and the Apothicons were the first to fall for it, but they became the lesser of the two evils and decided that we're just going to erase all of existence so Monty can't screw with it. But I don't know. That's what I
have one more theory to wrap up this topic. Or sorry, not one more theory. One more question that doesn't deserve an answer. Why does a creature that's been around since the beginning of time need a father figure?
Well, I meant
is that not an oxymoron?
Wait,
well, not Monty is the like the I still see it as like the what was it, the keepers that were
Oh, but you
corrupted.
said the Shadow Man was Monty was a father figure to the Shadow Man?
I
And
guess
if they were both there from the beginning of time, how in the world does either of them have any concept of what it's
Well,
like
okay,
to have a daddy?
I would pose it's like how. No,
Okay,
I'm not.
you're
I'm
going
not
to answer this
versed.
question anyway, so go ahead, Rad.
No, I
I
do.
just say I'm not versed in the Bible very much, but isn't the idea with like Jesus and the Holy Spirit is they're a part of God, but they're like the Son,
Oh,
like they split from
no.
one?
It's
Isn't
I
that
think
the
This
idea?
there's
Oh,
varying opinions on.
this is such. Oh,
I don't
this
know.
is
I don't
such.
want to.
Uh,
I don't
It's
want to
called.
derail. But
It's called the no hypostatic union. Anyways, and let's just leave it at that. If anyone wants to find out about the nature of the Trinity, it's called the hypostatic union. You can look it up and you can find the writings of Augustine and people for the last 2,000 years. So good luck with that.
All right, can I answer that? So I know like that this kind of has to do with the way the timeline is phrased, but the way I always saw it is that existence and sort of time or whatever, like the ether is like technically the first of creation. Like Monty might be, sort of like a sort of like a spiritual entity or something, and then like the apothecons were sort of the first of like physical creation or something like that. And that's kind of how I reconciled it, that technically one presupposed the other, and that's why it's sort of like they're still sort of like, I don't, yeah, not like a father figure, but more of like a paternalistic. But I guess it kind of makes sense if you're like talking about like, selling your soul or whatever. It's someone pretending to be there for your benefit and looking out for you, but you're really just doing their bidding. That's kind of like how I saw it, because I feel like the ether has to come first regardless. Because if everything is within the ether, like the apothecons, they manipulate the ether, they're sort of like lesser on the scale. So like something has to come before that, and that's what I just figured was Monty or wherever he dwells with, and the keepers were sort of the first of regular creation, maybe like on the highest dimension or whatever, but they're still sort of beholden to that. I don't know. And they had good Father's Day presents or something.
Man, well, where should we take it from here? We ascended to 50,000 feet. We gotta drop down from here somehow, man.
Yeah.
Like,
Take us
we've
home.
all got our masks on at
we
this
just gotta
point.
jump from the plane like that. Let's
It's
just
time
jump from
to
the
jump
plane.
into battle
It's about
royale,
time to
y'all.
jump. Yeah. Where are we dropping?
Oh, that's right. Where are we dropping? Oh man, well
All right.
said.
Well, I think we all start a I think we all start a GoFundMe to get Kevin Sherwood as the new head of Treyarch.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah. Put him
Yep.
in. Put him in, coach. He's
yeah,
ready.
good coach. No, exactly. So
I can
All right,
already
I
see
think
him
I'll-
on one of his live streams smoking a cigar and saying, "Nope."
I love those. I love those.
Oh, that's lovely. All right. Well, I think that marks the end of another episode of Podcaster Toten
Yep.
with myself, #TAC, Nabris Hunter, Mats, and Red. You always change your name. I don't. Rad
Yeah.
Zach.
Should I do Rad or Zach? I don't know. They're both one syllable. They're both pretty easy.
They're
I don't
both
know.
Brad
lovely,
Zach
that's all I.
is what?
They're all lovely. But yes, continue.
I just don't know. I'm just experimenting. I'm seeing what sticks.
I
Gotta
like it.
feel it out.
You'll always
Yeah.
be Rad Zach.
It's like
back
technically
in the-
having, you're like a new guest every time. So
Yeah. Oh yeah. That is a bit confusing. Oh well.
Alrighty,
but you're
boys.
still familiar enough.
All
There
right.
you
Yep.
go.
Thank you all. Thank you all for joining.
Yeah.
Yeah. See you next
Do
time.
it again
See ya.
Adios.
later.